are in this last of our Spark Talk series, it's become kind of a tradition that the local pastor gets a chance to say, what's on your heart for your local community? So this isn't being broadcasted anywhere but in this room, and I get to just talk to you guys. I just want to encourage you, based on what Mark is living out, to embrace your purpose in living into our city's prosperity. You have a role to play in creating the prosperity that I believe God wants Cincinnati to experience. And I think that happens if you're willing to pray dangerous prayers. So that's what I want to talk about for just a few minutes. I've been reflecting on this verse in Jeremiah, Old Testament passage. Jeremiah 29:7 says, "Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." This is exactly what Mark shared. And this is what God told his people when they were actually taken as captives from Israel to the city of Babylon. So imagine this. You would imagine that if God's people, because they lost a war, found themselves in another city, which is what they did in those ancient times, they would bring over captives and they would try to employ the talents of those captives to build their empire even more. That's what they did. You might imagine that God would say to his people, resist. Do not seek the welfare of that city. Pray for the day that I send you back, that I rescue you. But that's not what God says. God actually says to his people who are going to Babylon, seek the prosperity of Babylon. Because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Thankfully, I don't believe that Cincinnati is Babylon. But I do believe that this prayer, this direction from God is still true. But if we want to lean into it, we've got to be willing to pray dangerous prayers. The first dangerous prayer we have to be willing to pray is, disturb us, Lord. Disturb us, Lord. Let me read to you words that were penned in the 1600s. It's a prayer. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery. Where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. This prayer really struck me. My wife sent this to me this week. And it was part of a couple of things that began to change the direction of what I'm sharing with you right now. I had a different message in mind, and at some point I hope to share it. It involves Kanye West and some stuff there. It's really interesting. I can't wait to share it at some point. But God really was speaking to me through these words and saying, hey, I want you to stop and notice the things that I'm noticing in your city. And I changed my message when I was disturbed. What disturbed me was realizing that we're on pace to have one of the most violent summers of gun violence that we've had in our city in a long time. And that disturbed me because it took me immediately back to when I was 18 years old. I'll never forget. I was 18 years old, and I was in my first semester in college. Moved from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, where I was going to school, pooping in the water so that I could poop in your water. I didn't know that at the time, but moved from Pennsylvania, moved to Pittsburgh. And I remember my brother calling me, and my brother called me and said, hey, I got some bad news for you. Willie got shot last night. Now, Willie was a friend of mine that literally I have known all my life. And when I went away to college, one of the reasons that I wanted to go away to college is I did want to get out of the environment of my neighborhood. There were things about my neighborhood I loved, but violence was not one of them. And I lived in a neighborhood where that was not uncommon, but it had never really touched home like it did until it was a personal childhood friend. And immediately your mind goes to all these memories you have with this person, going back years and years and years. And I just remember grieving in that moment the loss of all that Willie would never, ever, ever achieve, things that he would never, ever experience in this life. And I think that as I sat last week and thought about the fact that for far too many people in our city, that is their reality, that this summer has already produced that for so many people in our city, it disturbed me. And I began to ask God, what do you want to say to me? What do you want to say to us? And I feel like the thing that God said was not for us to get so down in the dumps about that and feel like that's a helpless problem we can't do anything with, but to understand that in all of the unique ways that God has wired you and given you influence, we're to step in to bring peace and prosperity to our city. Not everybody's called to be involved in that specific challenge, and that's not my call for you today. But you are called to ask God, where is it that you're disturbing me? Mark was disturbed by someone telling him, we can't do that in Cincinnati. And he chose to follow that another step further and allow God to use him and his team to have an incredible impact. That is blessing individual lives in our city. So one of the things we are doing, I wanted to let you know, is we're going to host here in Crossroads, Oakley, in the middle of August, we're going to host a summit. And this is something the city has asked us to do. We're going to host a summit where all of the organizations who are working to end violence in our city are going to come together for a day of investment and focused on what to do. And because of you and the generosity of our community, we're going to host him here, and we're going to be able to feed into what ultimately will be a solution to that situation in our city. So I wanted to encourage you guys. And we're doing that because we can do that. And so I don't know what it might be for you, but I want to give you some clues. Brian has a great podcast out called The Aggressive Life, and he has a guest on there, Todd Henry. And Todd talked about how do you begin to uncover maybe the places where you're called to engage in life. And he has two very helpful questions. So I want you to think about these questions. The first question is, what stirs up compassionate anger in you? Compassionate anger, not anger because you got cut off in traffic. But compassionate anger, like this should not be true. This should not be happening in my city. This should not be the reality of the friends that I love. There's something that has to be done. That could have to do with a healthcare challenge. That could have to do with a relational challenge. That could have to do with an educational challenge. That could have to do with a business that doesn't exist, that needs to exist in our city. There are all kinds of ways that can play out. But what is it in you that causes you compassionate anger? Maybe another way to think about it is, what stirs you up emotionally? And maybe brings tears to your eyes. Or if you're a guy who doesn't cry, makes you have allergy attacks in your eyes. Because here's what I believe. I believe that the places where you are disturbed might just be the places where God is calling you to engage. Because God doesn't just want to disturb you, he wants to deploy you. Which leads to the second dangerous prayer. Second dangerous prayer is, send us, Lord. To not just be disturbed at a head level or not just be disturbed at a heart level, but actually be willing to pray with your feet. See, what makes a dangerous prayer is when it moves from your head to your heart to your feet. If you're willing to step into and be the answer to your prayer, then all of a sudden it gets dangerous. And why is it dangerous? Because God loves to answer prayers like that. God is looking for people who want to be deployed. And if you want to be deployed to seek the peace and prosperity of our city, I believe God wants to resource you for that. That he gets excited about the things that move us. There's a verse in Isaiah very simply says that. Here I am, Lord, send me. So I want to just encourage you with a couple people who are raising their hand and saying, here I am, Lord, send me. One is a group of people called the Undivided Justice Team. And so one of the things coming out of our undivided racial reconciliation work is a team of people who have said, we want to be the hands and feet of Jesus and actually do things to come against the racial inequities in our city, some of the things that Mark talked about. And so one of the things this group of people has done is they are investing in Winton Terrace. Winton Terrace is one of the poorest neighborhoods in our city, and it's often a place where many of those violent things happen. And there's a group of Crossroaders who have said, we are going to build relationship. We're going to build bridges in Winton Terrace. And it's been amazing to see God work through this group of people. They've done everything from go local projects to things that are more specifically focused in the neighborhood. But I want to tell you about some of the fruit that's coming out of that relationship. Already, we have had at the last man camp and woman camp, men and women from Winton Terrace who are coming to camps at Crossroads and experiencing the transformation that God does there. That's already happening. They've done Easter things in Winton Terrace. They've been able to do Father's Day and Mother's Day celebrations there. One of the coolest things that's happening right now is there's an awesome organization that does great work in our city called Saturday Hoops, if you've ever heard of it. They're invested in Over the Rhine, and for years they've been building relationships in a place for kids to develop and grow leadership and sports skills. And they were looking for a second location because they're growing to the point where they can impact more kids in our city. And they are choosing Winton Terrace as their second location for Saturday Hoops because of the Crossroads investment in Winton Terrace. There's a dilapidated basketball court that's not been used there. That thing is getting rehabbed, and there's going to be new life in that community because somebody raised their hand and said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Another great group of women that I love to talk about is the Ignite Women's Group. This is a group of women in Mount Lookout. Think about how this impacts a specific neighborhood. And years ago, this is a group that had a vision to just see God show up through the lives of women in their neighborhood. And so they started with a handful of women, and over the course of really about 2 years, they've grown to have more than 100 women engaging in Bible studies and prayer and engaging in the community around Kilgore School because somebody raised their hand and said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." I love these stories because these stories tell me that God is using us when we're willing to not just be disturbed, but to say, "Lord, send me to be part of what you're doing in my city." Last story I'll tell you is about a group of entrepreneurs who were disturbed that there weren't more places in the city for entrepreneurs to be built into in terms of their character and in terms of their business skills. And they had found in a small group they formed with our senior pastor a place that they wanted to create for other entrepreneurs. And out of that vision of a handful of entrepreneurs came Ocean, which now is impacting hundreds of companies in our city and beyond. And so again, I don't know where God is disturbing you. But I tell you what, if you're willing to pray the dangerous prayer for him to disturb you and to send you, you will have an impact in the peace and the prosperity of our city. And it can be as small as him leading you to transform a friendship that's been broken, or to see him show up in a marriage that looks like it's on the rocks, or to raise kids that go on to have a vision of impacting our city that changes life for everybody. It could be as small as that. Those things aren't really small. Or it could be, maybe there are people in here, God's giving you a dream for an organization. He's giving you a dream for a business. And if you are willing to raise your hand and say, "God, I'm willing for you to send me," then all of a sudden you and I get to see the prosperity grow in our city. One writer put it this way. They said, "What does this look like? Christians live in the city in a posture of service. New businesses and nonprofits renew their slices of culture in large and small ways. Believers integrate their faith with their work so that every vocation becomes a kingdom activity. If you're a teacher, you can teach as a kingdom activity. If you're a doctor, you can practice medicine as a kingdom activity. If you are a facilities worker, you can work in a facility as a kingdom activity. If you are an artist, you can use your art as a kingdom activity. No matter what your job is, social worker, psychologist, any role in here, if you work at Target, that can be a kingdom activity. No matter what it is, if you're a chef, you can cook and create meals, and it can be a kingdom activity. And God is looking for people who are willing to pray dangerous prayers that, like I said, move from head to heart to hands. To hands. There's a picture I love of a little boy with his hands dirty. And I don't know what it is about that. My kids love it. And didn't you, when you were young, love getting your hands dirty? Weren't some of the most joyful times when you were doing things where you got your hands dirty? It's because we're wired that way. We're wired to get into the dirt and through the dirt to create, through the dirt to play, through the dirt to transform. And I believe that God is looking for people who'll say, "Man, I'll get my hands dirty. I'm willing to get my hands dirty. God, disturb me. Here I am, Lord, send me," so that I can be a part of seeking the peace and the prosperity of our city. So we did this in reverse today on purpose. Usually if you've come to a Crossroads service before, we start with music, and then we go into the words that we share. But we wanted to do it in reverse because I really believe that this is a moment for you to start having a conversation with God. Next week we're starting a series about how God speaks and how you can hear him speak. And we thought, what better opportunity than right now to give you a moment in this space to think about the places where God might be disturbing you, to think about the places where God might be inviting you to jump in and get your hands dirty. So I'm going to invite you guys to stand. Like I said, we're going to do this in reverse. We're going to stand, and right now we're going to have a chance to sing. And as we sing, I want you to engage it full body. That's why I want you standing. I want you to put your hands up if you want to put your hands up. I want you to sing your guts out if you want to sing your guts out. I want you to do it all. And as you fully engage, I believe this might be a moment where you just might hear from God. Maybe it'll be a whisper of something he's calling you to do. Maybe it'll be an opportunity for you to process what you're feeling and to sense that God is saying, "Hey, there's more I want to show you because I want you to use your gifts for the peace and prosperity of the city around you. So as we worship, I want you to also listen as we sing together.